Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the regular July 25th, 2016 meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission. I will call the roll. Commissioner Keene.
Here.
Commissioner Hand.
Here.
Commissioner Chu.
Here.
And we are still awaiting an appointment for a replacement for Commissioner Andrews, so all present commissioners are accounted for. Turning to item 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Charlie Marsteller. For the record, I just wanted to alert the Commission to a very important post on the KQED news website that I got over the weekend pertaining to Lennar Corporation and the developments that are occurring at both locations in the city. There's significant and new items that are being reported in regards to the 3 indictments that have come down. So I did want to alert you to that, and if you don't have it, I can forward it to you, or to your executive director who will forward it to you. Okay? Just wanted to alert you to that important item.
I'm Bob Planthold. I just wanted to offer comment about what may be changes to the pending whistleblower ordinance that Supervisor Breed has introduced, and because of their SOUP's hiatus, may not be heard in committee for some time. Our group, Friends of Ethics, is suggesting that there ought to be added a requirement that there be mandatory training for all city employees. Right now, department heads, certain levels of managers, commissioners have to get training in ethics and sunshine. The current draft of the whistleblower seems to require that same type of training for the same type of employees. We're suggesting it's not enough, and because you folks would help develop, monitor, proofread any training on the whistleblower legislation if it is passed, wanted to give you an awareness of there's potential changes. We're asking for this mandatory training because a lot of city employees do not know about whistleblower ordinance, about protections, about their rights. And because these trainings can be done online, we don't think it would necessarily be burdensome. I want to give you a real-life example of why and how people may benefit from such training. On the very last night that I was on the Ethics Commission, after I left early for family reasons, a janitorial maintenance person stopped me in the hall of City Hall and told me some things, expecting me to follow through, to file a complaint. But that person wouldn't come forward. That person was afraid of job retribution. The claims, the assertions made were disturbing, unnerving, and yet that person did not feel empowered or safe in even asking anybody in that person's union, in that person's office for help or understanding, how do I complain about this? And it was significant financial misdeeds alleged. So this can be a real situation for somebody at any and all levels of city government. You're not going to be involved in enacting the legislation, but you may be involved in implementing it. That's why I wanted to let you know now of these possible changes to be more inclusive and more responsive to all in the city staff.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hello, Michael Petrellis. I'm a sunshine advocate. I'm here to address several matters. The first is there's much talk these days about creating a public advocate here in San Francisco. I believe that we do need a public advocate, in part because of the failures of the Ethics Commission. And when I say the failures of the Ethics Commission, I'd like to remind you that I was here a few months ago to discuss a complaint I filed on February 24th. 5 months ago, I brought it to your attention that in October, Willie Brown attended a meeting at the mayor's office that I obtained the sign-in sheet through a public public records request. Willie Brown did not list his organization on this sign-in sheet regarding the meeting he had in October about banking matters with the mayor. Here it is 5 months later. I've not been contacted by any investigator. I've come and discussed this complaint with you guys here. Nothing has happened. Why should I or any member of the public file complaints when after 5 months nothing is happening about the investigations? Nothing. The other matter I wish to discuss with you is something that's coming before you in July. It should have been on your agenda tonight, and that is my complaint against Steve Cowa, the vice mayor. The Sunshine Ordinance Task Force has found that he is in direct violation of city records and retaining city records. He's been destroying his records. They put it in writing. The mayor's office put it in writing that Steve Cowa every 2 weeks was destroying his agenda. So the complaint finally came from the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force to you. It was supposed to be on your agenda for July 25th, yet the mayor's chief of staff sent you a letter, I also got a copy of it, saying that Mr. Cowa would be allegedly traveling today, and not only that, but they needed more time to consult with the city attorney regarding this matter. They've had months of consultations with the city attorney, who is also in this building, yet they requested an extension. Unfortunately, Leanne Pelham, on behalf of Mr. Rene, sent me a letter stating that the request for a continuance was granted. And there is nothing in this letter from Leanne Pelham, the director, on behalf of the commissioners, saying that you verified Steve Cowa is indeed out of town. Did you question why the mayor still needs a whole nother month to consult with the city attorney about this matter? Did you verify in any way that Steve Cowa is indeed out of town? Well, maybe if we had a public advocate, we'd get some answers. It is not okay that you have delayed the Steve Cowa matter until next month. We need urgency from the Ethics Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I turn to item number 3, discussion and possible action on draft minutes for the Commission's June 27th, 2016 regular meeting. Any commissioners have any comments? If not, I have some very minor ones. On page 4, there is a reference to a number of witnesses from Represent Us, and that should be caps for Represent Us, initial caps for the organization. And that's on both page 4 and 5. Other than that, I have no comment. Any public comments on the minutes? Hearing none, I will consider a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved unanimously. Turning to item number 4, continued discussion and possible action on proposal regarding a possible November 2016 ballot measure to restrict lobbyist gifts, campaign contributions, and bundled contributions. And I will just let Executive Director Pelham just update us where we are, although I think the memos and the documents that are attached are very detailed and helpful.
Great. Thank you, Chair Rennie. I want to draw your attention to, and the public's attention to, the amended documents, supplemental documents that we provided. On July 15th, when we first posted the memo regarding Agenda Item 4 with some initial draft language, as you had requested in June, we provided both a June approach and a July alternative, as you had indicated an interest in. We provided that on July 15th publicly because we did want to circulate it as broadly as possible to receive as much public comment to enable a full discussion this evening. We received some public comment. We did some further revisions based on that and further examination of the language. And so we had a memo that we circulated on July 22nd, I believe. Just confirm. That has the revised language attached to it. So for purposes of the language that is the most current, they are labeled Supplemental Attachment 4. Item 4, excuse me, Supplemental Memo Attachment 2, and Item 4, Supplemental Memo Attachment 3. We will get these straight. Conveniently referred to as the revised June approach and the revised July alternative. We'll get the hang of it before the evening is over. So we have the language here. The memo that was distributed with it explains how the two versions are similar, changes that were made to both, and they also indicate where the two versions are different. So I'm happy to walk through that if that's useful to you or the public, or to take public comment or discussion that you might have at this point.
Unless other commissioners feel, I think that what the material you supplied us was very helpful and explanatory, and I would be prepared to not require you to go through it step by step.
I agree with that, Mr. Chair.
Likewise.
All right, let's, I guess I'll ask, do any of the commissioners have any, well, first, before, as I understand it, what's on the table today is to come up with a final determination as to the proposed ballot measure that we're agreed to by the end of this meeting. Because of the timing, we have to, tonight is either fish or cut bait.
That's correct.
So with that in mind, I guess I'll let the commissioners, any commissioner want to start commenting as to either of the options at June or July as to which they may be inclined to favor, and any suggestions, if any, to changes to the present drafts of those options.
Mr. Chair, to get the discussion going, I would just move approval of the revised July proposal.
Which proposal?
The amended,
The revised July alternative, which would be Item 4, Supplemental Memo Attachment 3.
couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. I will first ask for, before I ask for public comment, I have some comments about that draft and questions and possible changes, but I am in support of the July attachment. But if we could turn to that attachment. Turning to that question I had first on page.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, can you position the microphone so it's closer to your mouth and in a better position?
Sure, if you can't hear me.
Thank you. It is hard to hear you. Thank you.
I guess the first question I had is on page 4, where there is a question about controlled, line 6. It says, controlled committees shall have the same meaning as set forth in section 1.104 of this code, but shall not include any state committees. Question is, what about committees that are set up to support the candidate but are not controlled by it? They are not covered by this?
Address that.
And is it the city attorney's view that there are case laws that say they can't be covered?
Yeah, and I believe Director Pelham had a footnote, I can't remember whether it was the first memo or the supplemental memo.
Right.
That addressed a district court case that we were actually involved in 2007, which involved San Francisco's attempt to place a limit on contributions to independent expenditure committees, or in other words, committees independent of any candidate's control. And that was the plaintiffs moved for a preliminary injunction, which the district court granted, and we later settled that case for a not insignificant amount of money. So based on that case, obviously a very local case involving one of our own ordinances, as well as other case law in the Ninth Circuit and throughout the country, I think it would not be particularly legally defensible to include any limits on contributions to independent expenditure committees.
What's the rationale of saying a lobbyist can't contribute directly to a candidate, but he or she can contribute to a committee that's, quote, independent, but whose only purpose is to get that candidate elected?
Right, and I'm in one of those uncomfortable positions where I'm trying to defend Supreme Court opinions that I don't necessarily personally agree with.
It's squarely on
let me
point.
try my best.
Yeah.
Yeah, so going back to Buckley v. Vallejo, the big 1976 case, Supreme Court case dealing with contributions versus expenditures and, what are the constitutional bounds and placing limits on what you can do in terms of supporting different kinds of political committees, there is a very big distinction drawn between making contribution directly to a candidate or making contribution to a group of people, in this case an independent expenditure committee, that is operating independent of the candidate. And this is something that has evolved over time, and you've probably seen various news articles and commentaries about things like super PACs, which are essentially independent expenditure committees, and other ways, frankly, that there are ways to get around this sort of distinction. But for better or for worse, it is a distinction that exists in the case law, that there is very little you can do, frankly, to regulate independent committees that are not controlled by a candidate.
Right. Then on page 5, I know that either Friends of Ethics or Represent Us had brought that we should add on our definition of lobbyist firm. Is there any reason why that can't be done?
We did look at that question after receiving the public comment, and one of the changes that we made to clarify that they can be caught up in the restrictions to some extent was to put in language that clarifies the aggregation of gifts and the aggregation of contributions. Existing language that we have currently in our city regulations with regard to contributions provides some circumstances in which somebody who directs or controls a contribution by another would have those contributions aggregated with their own. So using that, we took a parallel approach to include language in this revised version that would have similar result for gifts. So we thought that gets most directly at the question of if a lobbyist's firm may also have gifts that are, or contributions for that matter, that are controlled by the lobbyist. They would all be aggregated under this approach.
And turning to page 8. This section, starting on line 16, all campaign contributions of $100 or more, goes on. How is that even relevant if we've said they can't contribute and they can't deliver?
Under this approach, you may recall, excuse me, from the June meeting that this July revised alternative intends to create a ban that is narrowly tailored to the individuals or the offices that a lobbyist is registered to lobby. So assuming that the approach, if that approach were enacted, there could be offices where a lobbyist is not lobbying. And so, therefore, they would still have a disclosure requirement for any contributions that would not be banned under this approach.
Well, I wonder if, because I've read it and I thought, why is this here? And it seems to me that maybe to avoid ambiguity, say, unless otherwise banned, all contributions. Some language to that effect is saying this is applying only to that exception where they're making contributions to a candidate for whom they have not registered to lobby.
Right. So, a very, very good question, and I guess or comment, and I guess in terms of drafting the measure, since it is a ballot measure, and since it can be, in some instances, difficult to amend a ballot measure at a later date, even though we obviously have something that addresses that issue. We did try to go through, and in terms of drafting this, try to keep our edits fairly light. We didn't want to edit unnecessarily or any more than we needed to, so as to give us flexibility in the future. So while I certainly understand where you're coming from, Chair Rennie, I think it's best to not edit more than we need to. And certainly there could be instances where a lobbyist would need to disclose a contribution if they're not banned from doing it, given the tailored approach of this alternative. Yeah, and certainly, thank you, Leanne. And certainly, we're going to have manuals, we'll have forms, we'll have FAQs, we'll have regulations, and certainly the staff will take calls, presumably, from members of the public that will allow them to clarify any questions or ambiguities along this front.
I mean, because as I read it, I said, why is this here when what we're doing is banning lobbyists from making contributions? Now, you're saying, but there are certain exceptions, or they may not have registered for a candidate who they're lobbying. And if you're comfortable that it doesn't create sufficient ambiguity that somebody could challenge us later and saying we really didn't intend to ban them. All right. Then on page 11, under section 2.115, limits and prohibition, the gift prohibition. Is there any reason not to say no lobbyist or lobbying firm shall make a gift?
I think that it's sort of similar to what City Attorney Shen was just saying. We don't currently have lobbyist firms registered. We might have to create a definition for that, and we thought that the most direct way to get at that was to use the aggregation rules that we saw similarly applied to contributions. Again, I think it's a point well taken, and it's something we would want to make sure we're very clear about, that those are examples where lobbying firms' activities may be caught under this to the extent that the lobbyist is directing and controlling them.
And then in line 23, it says no contact lobbyist.
Yeah, should that come out?
Wasn't that intended to be lobbyists, including both expenditure lobbyists?
This particular prohibition is appropriate for contact lobbyists because it's about an actual contact with a city officer. So this particular prohibition is attempting to get at any contact lobbyist who misrepresents who they are, I guess for the purpose of misleading disclosure or whatnot. But since expenditure lobbyists don't necessarily contact city officers, they're making money to urge others to contact lobbyists, it doesn't seem quite as appropriate.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm sorry, are you on 23 of page 12?
No, page
Yeah.
Oh, page 11. Well, my apologies.
Page 11.
My apologies.
Line 23.
Oh, right. Okay, my apologies. Yes, thank you. Good catch.
That should be out.
Yes,
right?
my apologies.
Okay,
I thought you were talking about the next page.
Then, turning to page 12, line 8, there was a suggestion made in some of the communications, either from Friends of Ethics or Represent Us, about that we should have a prohibition on city officers soliciting contributions from a lobbyist. Now, as I understand, possibly in Supervisor Peskin's legislation on Behest, that provision is something that's being considered that would prohibit a city official from soliciting a charitable gift to an educational or whatever other institution it might be, or governmental institution. But is there any reason why, where we say that that no officer of the city and county may accept or solicit any gift? Is there any reason why we don't include including soliciting contributions to 501c3 organizations, whether for charitable, whether for educational, governmental, or other purposes?
I think it's a question of the place that we started from, of having this focused on the type of personal benefit that an official might have, either through a campaign contribution from a lobbyist or a gift from a lobbyist. Or certainly, to the extent that a lobbying firm is providing some benefit to some nonprofit that an elected official cares about, that's a question that probably should be looked at. But I'm not sure that it's only as to lobbyists. So I think on balance, with the approach that this measure intends to take, it was narrower than getting at those issues, admittedly. But I think those are issues that should be looked at in a broader context with others who might also be asking for those kinds of donations, or being solicited for those kinds of donations.
And as I understand, it may be part of what Supervisor Peskin's legislation is looking at on Behest. So I will drop that comment. On page 13, one of the suggestions was how they can circumvent it, and we seek to solve it with a 90-day window, people trying to circumvent changing their designation. Is there any reason why we couldn't, and when we're talking about bundling, is there any reason why we couldn't make a complete prohibition on bundling? Because in many ways, that's the most egregious action that goes on, is that collecting money by lobbyists and then delivering it on behalf of a number of people. And if we just had said you can't bundle if you're a lobbyist, would we be in trouble?
Yeah, so certainly as you recall from the last meeting, I believe you were the commissioner who proposed taking the targeted approach that's represented in the revised July alternative. And certainly if we think that approach the tailored approach is appropriate for direct campaign contributions, you would think that the same tailored approach would be appropriate for bundled contributions as well. Again, from a constitutional perspective, we are impacting people's ability to make campaign contributions to certain officials. And as much as you can make that targeted at the anti-corruption concerns this entire scheme is getting at, the better and more legally defensible it is.
I understand that on individual contributions,
right, that
it's targeted. Yeah. But if we said on bundling, because bundling in many ways is much more of a potential for corruption than the $500 contribution. And as some of the testimony we've seen, that some of these lobbyists bundle hundreds of thousands of dollars and deliver it. Well, that's if we say we don't want them to contribute directly to a candidate, but we're going to allow them to bundle it to any candidate other than those for which they've registered. It seems to me we may be missing a chance. We may lose. Somebody may attack it, and some court may say you should have targeted your bundling. But I would be disposed to try and stop the bundling.
So the rationale for preventing, in this proposal, direct contributions from a lobbyist to an official that they're registered to lobby is because we think that that contribution will essentially allow them to curry favor with the official, make the official more receptive to whatever the lobbyist is proposing or advocating for or maybe opposing in some instances. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the Commission's view on bundling is largely the same. It's not different in kind, it's simply different in scope. That instead of simply talking about a single up to $500 individual contribution from a lobbyist, we should also be concerned, rightly so it seems, about the corruptive influence of not my $500 check if I were a lobbyist, but a fairly decent stack of $500 checks from clients, other people, interested parties, and how that could also have a potentially corruptive influence on the recipient of those bundled contributions. So we're getting at the same problem. It's not a fundamentally different problem. It's the same problem, but just different in scope. So it seems that if we believe that for the smaller contribution it's appropriate to target, and that is say that the ban should only apply with respect to those officials the lobbyist is registered to lobby, it seems like we want to maintain that parallel structure with respect to bundled contributions as well. Again, we think that bundled contributions, like an individual contribution, sort of paves the way for the lobbyist to have perhaps a more successful pitch to an elected official.
All right, just it's a thought I throw out.
Could I follow up on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Listening to Chair Rennie, he's very makes a very important point, I think, in regard to what we're attempting to do, and just isolating bundling on it by itself and saying that this is something that is, by its very nature, subject to a great amount of abuse, and the whole aspect of political contributions not being limited too much as to be unconstitutional in regard to restrictions on freedom of speech that you've identified, that Buckley versus Vallejo and the cases set out, have mainly been concerned with something where you're preventing someone from making a statement, I favor this person, and you're preventing them from making that statement by them giving money to that person, and you can't do that. You simply can't have a blanket kind of preventing of someone to do that. But we wouldn't be preventing them from making that statement or giving contributions to a person and therefore making that statement if we say, fine, you can do that, but you can't bundle. This is a mechanism that we've identified as something that is too much subject to corruption. Big pay-to-play characters come in with a ton of envelopes from big shots, and they bundle and they get special favors. So I think if we could, and I'm not so sure we couldn't. In fact, as I listened to Chair Rennie, I became more and more convinced that we could. If we could just take bundling itself and have a prohibition relating to bundling, I think we might be able to do it, and I think it might be something that we would want to do. So is that too ambitious?
I have a wanted to weigh in here as well. I understand the desire to prohibit bundling outright, but I'm wondering what does the data show us from the bundling that has gone on in the past? Like, who has it gone to, and how much contact has there been following the payment? Because in the absence of contact, I don't know if lobbyists would bundle a large amount of money and contribute to the mayor's campaign and not follow up. Like, how would they further their agenda or their client's agenda in the absence of contact?
Yeah, so, I certainly did work with the staff on developing a legislative record to create the foundation for this proposal. And we certainly did find some instances in which there was some bundling and then some contacts in a seemingly relevant time period. perhaps there wasn't always a close one-to-one connection between a bundle contribution or set of bundle contributions and a contact. But certainly there seems to be, in some instances, some connections there. But going back to Commissioner Keene's point, you know, and I know the Commission's well aware of this, you know, that the purpose of campaign finance laws, as recognized the Supreme Court, is legitimate if those restrictions are seeking to prevent corruption or the appearance of corruption. And what I'm hearing from Commissioner Keene is that bundling is something that we want to prevent or avoid or impact, but for an entirely different, it seems like, interest. And I would simply urge the Commission to keep focused on the anti-corruption interests that all these proposals we're working on are fundamentally geared towards combating.
Well, what I said was not a concern about bundling different from anything other than corruption or the appearance of corruption. So I don't understand when you say that my addressing the aspect of bundling, somehow I'm addressing it in a whole new way, different from everything that we've been targeting so far. I think what Chair Rennie brought up and what I followed with is something that is right in line with the whole topic of where we're going, and that is addressing issues of corruption and appearance of corruption in campaign financing. So what did you have in mind when you just said that I'm addressing something different?
And, you know, apologize if I misunderstood.
No, that's
you.
all right.
But if we're talking about a tailored approach here, if we're talking about prohibiting contributions or other fundraising activity from a lobbyist to an official when that lobbyist is attempting to contact that official, that is the tailored approach that the Commission suggested at the last month's meeting and seems appropriate. Again, if we think these contributions make the recipient of the contributions more receptive to a lobbyist than the lobbyist otherwise would be, you know, that the lobbyist has a leg up because they have made a contribution directly or have presented a bundle of contributions.
I think you've unduly limited what we've been talking about all along, because you just said if the lobbyist is bundling for the purpose of contacting the official, that's not any kind of limitation we've been talking about. We've been talking about if the lobbyist is bundling in order to unduly influence the official, whether there's contact or not. Contact is, I don't think, is relevant at all.
So I guess I'm a little bit unclear how would you be, at least with respect to most of the lobbyists that are registered right now, how would you be influencing the official without contacting them? Isn't that how you would influence them?
Well, if the official knew that whether you contacted him or her or not, you had been able to bundle together a lot of money and it had come his way, that would certainly influence him. Whether that official ever had any kind of contact with you whatsoever. The money was bundled and the money then got into your campaign committee's funds, and the official knows, this is Joe Bigshot who did this for me, and Joe Bigshot wants me to approve his paving over Golden Gate Park so he can make some money there. Right. So I think I'll vote for that. Wouldn't that be corruption in terms of a quid pro quo type situation?
But in the absence of contact, how would the elected official know that the lobbyist wanted to pave over Golden Gate Park?
I think that you can get a message to someone in lots of ways without actually having a one-on-one contact with that person. Clearly, that's the more direct way. But if I'm a politician and I hear that someone has been responsible for an enormous amount of money to be placed at my disposal or and has done it through bundling, even though I've never met that person, I never will meet that person, I might tend to feel very favorable towards that person in regard to later influence that's going to be put upon me for for something that has to be done. I don't think contacting is really somehow the main litmus test of this. Are we talking? Am I talking parallel to something here? I'm getting the impression that from your looks that either I'm more incoherent than I usually am, or
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think, I mean, I guess the question is that logic would apply then to others who are also not lobbyists. And so is there, how are those messages sent and for what purposes, and how far would you take a bundling ban? I mean, it does raise that question, I think, as well. But I think the assumption that this discussion has been built on is that these are folks who are either spending a lot of money to directly to communicate a message to elected officials to achieve a certain outcome, either through expenditure lobbying at a certain level or through compensation from clients. And when you remove the communication piece from that interaction, I think it begs a question about whether there's a broader approach that needs to be looked at, and whether it just seems like to Commissioner Chu's point, how do you know unless there's some sort of communication about an interest? And that seems to be one of the critical links in this puzzle.
Okay, I'm not going to beat on it.
Let me ask you. Your alternative was setting a 90-day limit. Why the 90 days? What is there some magic that?
No, there's no magic to 90 days. I think in response to the concern that Represent Us had raised about whether there might be a intentional gaming of the system by people registering and then deregistering in just solely so that they can contribute or bundle. That it's in essence trying to establish some sort of a cooling off period after there's been that interaction and that attempt to establish a relationship through a communication where money would then follow that simply because of a deregistration.
What's the timing of when somebody has to file for an office candidate? How far in advance from an election?
It can vary tremendously. I mean, usually the deadline, I believe right now, for declaring for a November election would be early August. I think probably a lot of more credible candidates probably take out their papers early spring, something along that sort, especially if they're seeking public financing, for which they need to assemble additional paperwork and evidence of public support. I think something like that. So probably not quite a year out from the election, but not too far from that would be my guess.
I'm just wondering if the date, if you moved it out, say, to 180 days, half a year, the likelihood that somebody would try and game the system by discontinuing his or her contact with the city official with the anticipation that going to raise money for them.
Right. I mean, I would certainly
and maybe you could put it at both ends, and would be prohibited from lobbying 90 days or 100 days that official after. I don't know.
Comment? I think we had some discussion about the pre-registration concept of can you, the concern that people will give a lot of contributions and then register only after that activity is done.
Right.
I think that is fundamentally a part of a process where you are trying to tailor a contribution ban to communications that are intended to influence a person. And under that approach, I think it's hard to try and establish a pre-registration ban of some sort, because in fairness to anybody who's attempting to do that process, if they have not yet communicated it with somebody, then why would we say that you cannot?
No, I understand that, but
ban? So we took the sweep after the fact.
To stop somebody from saying, I'm going to lobby the mayor, but then 90 days before he deregisters, says, I'm no longer going to lobby.
Mm-hmm.
then goes out and raises a lot of money for the mayor, and the next day says, now I'm going to lobby the mayor. You haven't done much, have we? At that point. So you couldn't you?
It's a risk of the approach.
You could put a restriction at the other end, couldn't you?
Certainly, if I could respond to your previous question about why not going to 6 months, so I guess 180 days. I mean, my general impression, although certainly would defer to the director on this, is that certainly within the last 6 months of a campaign is where you would think most of the fundraising would happen. 6 months out relative to a November election, obviously puts you sort of early May, right, early mid-spring, which is fairly early on, I think, in most candidates' life cycles in terms of fundraising. Certainly a lot more of it tends to come in at the very, very end. So, if you want to extend 90 to 180, I can certainly understand that approach.
Okay. And turning again on page 13 to the aggregation, that is in there because of the fact that we're targeting the lobbyists in terms of who they've registered to lobby. In other words, that's why if they're, what are they aggregating a contribution if they can't make a contribution?
Again, there may be certain circumstances where they can't make a contribution, but because there's no entity like a lobbying firm that's prohibited from making a contribution, if the lobbyist is prohibited from making a contribution because they're registered to lobby that agency, that individual, then if they direct and control the contribution of their firm, that would also be prohibited.
All right. I think those are the only comments I had. Do any commissioners have any comments? Call for public comment on the motion that we adopt the July proposal as drafted.
I'm Bob Planthold. I'm a member of Friends of Ethics, and yes, we support moving ahead with the revised July, and I'll let you fill in the 28 other words afterwards. I wanted to speak specifically to the questions raised by Commissioners Keene and Chu from my own experience. So first off, with regard to Section 2.115A2, which shows up on page 12, about the restriction on soliciting. I wanted to give you an example of why it's worthwhile, why it may be beneficial. I happen to be in a car driving with somebody to an agency meeting outside San Francisco. This person is paid by a major company in a major industry in San Francisco. People would look at that person as a lobbyist, maybe official, maybe not. I was in the car. This person got a call from the mayor's office asking that person to raise a lot of money for a charitable sports event. Now, fortunately, nobody heard me, and I didn't say anything, and the guy I was with didn't say anything. But I'm hearing this, and my ears are really starting to ring, because he was also being considered for a commission appointment. And right away I started to think, so is it like you got to produce money for the mayor's or supervisor or assembly member or dog catcher? Do you have to produce money in order to be considered for an appointment? So I'm suggesting there's a benefit to keeping that provision in. With regard to bundling, and Commissioner Chu's question of what's the record show, it's pretty damn hard to find out if things really are bundled. I've gone to lots of fundraising dinners. You pay basically for the dinner and a portion goes to a committee. I've seen people walk up and hand checks to somebody, not to the candidate. There was one elected official who had a cousin who's on the central committee or was on the central committee of a major political party. So people would know, go to the cousin, give the cousin the checks. So there's no formal record of whoever handed in a bunch of checks to that cousin. The campaign just records the individual checks. Who gave it, Who was their employer? Dollar amount. You don't know that Joe Big Shot was the one who brought these forward, but the cousin knows. So the record is hard to find, hard to verify, incomplete, and that's why there's a benefit to keeping in a prohibition about bundling, just because that does happen all too often if you really sit on the sidelines and watch these events.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's Charlotte Hill. I'm the Communications Director for Represent Us and the Director of Represent California, which is our California state branch. I'm also a resident of San Francisco since 2011 and an advocate for political reform in America more broadly, and I am so pleased and grateful to see this initiative being considered for the November ballot here in San Francisco, and specifically the July alternative of the initiative, which Represent Us fully supports. San Francisco, as you know, has struggled in recent years with public corruption cases, and I believe we have the opportunity with this initiative to put those abuses in our past and become leaders in the fight against political corruption. So I want to thank you for seriously considering the lobbyist ban we've put forward. We greatly appreciate the thoughtfulness with which you've approached this initiative, and we look forward to working with you in the future to make our city's elected officials more responsive to the people of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Morgan Aiken-Young with Represent Us, and I just wanted to thank you all for your hard work and echo Charlotte's thanks on really the thought and effort put into this measure. We really appreciate it, and we're really excited that this is being considered for November. And just to be respectful of your time, we have a lot of people here supporting, and I'd just like to ask everyone to stand up so you guys can see everyone in support, either from Represent Us, Friends of Ethics, and the community. So thank you, guys.
Helen Greco, California Common Cause. I want to thank the commissioners and the executive director for paying such great attention to this and bringing forth a solution. California Common Cause endorses the July alternative, mostly because it imposes a clearer and more administrative rule and is more likely to withstand legal challenge than the June approach. California law indicates that absolute bans on lobbying contributions are unconstitutional, but bans from lobbyists to officials they lobby have been upheld. The July alternative, by modeling state law, accounts for this distinction. The June approach, while not a ban, proposes to treat lobbyists differently from the general public, even vis-a-vis officials they do not lobby, a likely free speech violation given current case law. So we support the July alternative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Debbie Lerman from the San Francisco Human Services Network. I am speaking to a memo that I submitted very last minute, dated today, regarding the proposed ballot measure. And I have a couple of points to make. First of all, this is a good government measure, and we do agree with its intent. The concerns we've raised have only pertained to a couple of situations which would have a detrimental impact on nonprofits, but no risk of undue influence. So first of all, there is in the language of the ordinance an exception for gifts of food or refreshment, and we want to say thank you for including that in the ordinance. We hope you will accept the staff's draft language on that point, and we appreciate it. Secondly, we had asked that there be a restoration of an exemption that is in current law around nonprofit conferences so that we can share information with public officials. It is my understanding today, I had a phone call from Director Pelham clarifying that the state definition of gifts, which is what is included in this measure, does include still that particular narrow exemption for informational conferences and symposia. So therefore, my memo, I believe that concern has been addressed, and so just want to say that for the record as well. And those are our two most significant problems with the measure. So that is great news. I do want to make one technical point that I believe should be addressed in this measure, and that relates to inflation. The charter of San Francisco, which lists the duties and responsibilities of this commission, requires an annual adjustment of any kinds of limitation or disclosure thresholds imposed by city law, or using the annual increase or decrease in CPI. I believe that since this is a ballot measure, it supersedes the charter, which is older, and therefore there would need to be language in here specifying that those duties and responsibilities are also part of this ordinance. And that's the problem with ballot measures. Things get set in stone. If you have a $25 food or refreshment limit in a few short years in San Francisco's economy, that'll only have a dollar value of $20. So there should be a CPI adjustment made to that. And I hope that the city attorney can clarify whether the charter does, in fact, apply here, or whether something would need to be placed into the ordinance to ensure that the duties and responsibility and authority to make CPI adjustments to the figures in this measure would still be within your purview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's C3699-11.
Hello, I'm David. I'm a member of Represent Us, and I'd just like to very much thank you guys. Thank the Commission for taking into consideration this action to try and bring some confidence back to government. We formed our group about a year back. A lot of us, this is our first foray into trying to see how government works and how we can make our mark on it, and attempting to make sure that every person in the city of San Francisco has an equal voice and that no one is given preferential treatment because of the amount of money they can contribute, in what way or what manner, what rules they circumvent, is very important to us. We've been working towards making sure that people's perception of government, which is currently rock bottom, both in the city and the state and nationally, in terms of corruption and in terms of undue influence of money, we seek to curtail that. And we are very helpful, and we are very glad that you are helping us in trying to pass legitimate reforms that address this issue and helping turn the boat around and getting voters confident and excited about the direction that city government is facing. I'd like to thank you from my heart that what you're doing is bringing a lot of hope to us, and we hope that you stay on the right course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Mintzer. I'm a political and elections law attorney here in the city. I have two very minor comments to make with regard to the gift prohibition and to the campaign contribution and bundling prohibitions. Reflecting on a comment I made last month during this meeting, I believe that you guys should consider amending the gift prohibition to only apply to contact lobbyists as opposed to expenditure lobbyists. The reason for this is kind of reflective in the kind of government purpose for passing this regulation, and that we want to ensure that those who contact city officials cannot curry favor with them through gifts. As you know, and as I've discussed before, an expenditure lobbyist is indirectly urging others to contact, in the public usually, to contact public officials for purposes of influencing legislation. There is no risk of quid pro quo in this situation. There's no risk of corruption in this situation. And I feel that by having a broad definition of lobbyists for the gift prohibition, you may run afoul to some constitutional and legal issues in that respect. Again, I can't see the reason for this regulation, and I encourage you to look at that. If a small nonprofit spends $2,500, or I believe is the limit, in order to say, hey, contact your legislator, your board of supervisors about affordable housing, that should not have them have a gift prohibition. It's also worth noting that the state prohibition that applies no matter what to all local and state officials is $460. I don't see much of a difference by limiting a nonprofit to $460 versus $0. Another kind of just a very, very technical cleanup, and I believe this is the purpose of the law, and I just want to make sure that it's clear. With regard to the campaign contribution prohibition, this is page 13, subdivision E, line 4. It says no lobbyist shall make any campaign contribution, and then it goes on to say if that lobbyist is registered with the city elected to lobby a city elective officer or has been registered within the past 90 days. Again, as you know, expenditure lobbyists do not contact officials directly. They will never register to contact a specific official because they're doing so indirectly, they're doing so through public communications. A small technical cleanup that might provide more clarity in the law would be no contact lobbyist shall make any contribution. It's also worth noting that there is a corporate ban on contributions in San Francisco, so most expenditure lobbyists, 501c3, C4, C6, cannot make contributions to begin with as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hello again, Michael Petrellis. I'd like to see this move forward, and I am really concerned that if the matter goes forward before the voters and it's approved, it doesn't take effect until 2018. That's what I'm reading in your documents, okay? And I think that is a reason why you need to move this forward now. You need to get it on the ballot for this November, because by the time 2018 rolls around and these changes go into effect, we're going to discover that the lobbyists and some politicians have found new ways to get around whatever it is that's going to be hopefully approved in November. Like many of us, I've been reminded in the past few days, thanks to the Hillary leaks of all these emails from the Democratic National Committee, the system is rigged. The system is rigged against the public. And when we have that as our philosophy, when we're looking at what this commission is doing or wants to do, and then the proposals that come from the supervisors, every step of the way and every person who's involved in your process is part of the system that is rigged. These changes that you're going to bring about, they're relatively minor in terms of bundling and funding and everything like that. And you know what it's also telling me? It's telling me that the supervisors are not doing their jobs, that they are trying to put this matter before the voters. And again, I hope it passes when the voters get a chance to weigh in on it. But if we had the supervisors doing their jobs and creating the laws that we need, we wouldn't be putting the burden on the voters to weigh in on what is going to be a pretty complicated issue, I believe, for the average voter. So, you guys, I believe, here at the Ethics Commission have to look at radically changing how you do business. And that also goes for the supervisors and all their aides. They need to figure out a way to address our problems, modify the laws, especially in terms of ethics, at the Board of Soups. And I hope that we get to see that change happening very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Alex Kaplan, the Policy Director for Represent Us National. First off, I just want to thank you again for your time and devotion to this, to the open process of crafting this correctly, and to give a big thanks to the staff who have done such an enormous amount of work on this and worked with us for the past 4 to 5 months on it. I want to do also a quick cleanup of my own. I think on page 12, line 11, there's a doubling up of the word less, and that the first less should be dropped. It says less $25 or less per occasion, and rather should read worth less $25. Worth $25 or less per occasion. Very quickly, also, I want to respond to the last two comments and urge the Commission to retain and continue to apply the gift ban, especially travel gifts, to expenditure lobbyists as well. I think the connection does exist. The idea that an expenditure lobbyist who is in many ways essentially augmenting their lobbying power by spending money to try to get others to do lobbying for them, could then give a gift or a travel gift, a quite significant one, and try to leverage their influence that way. I think that especially from talking to voters in the city and the many Represent Us members who have showed up today, the idea that anyone trying to exert specific influence as a lobbyist, whether contact or expenditure, on a sitting elected official as really blows their mind that that's possible to the extent it is, specifically with the travel gifts currently. And then I also want to applaud just what was pointed out, I would like to ask you all to consider applying the travel gift prohibition earlier than January 1st, 2018. From my understanding with Director Pelham, talking with her, the January 1st, 2018 start date is so that the staff and through the computer systems can rightfully take enough time to make sure that the registration tailoring can apply. But because the gift ban is not, and purposefully and rightfully not tailored and applies throughout, should apply relatively immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Elena Schmidt with Friends of Ethics. I just want to join the chorus of thanking you for what you've done, and especially call out the work that staff has done to get this in front of the public enough that they could hear comments, respond to comments, and show us revised language. It's made a big difference in terms of your final product, and you can tell from the comments tonight that getting that kind of very good public process makes a difference. So I thank you for that. And Friends of Ethics obviously thanks you for putting this forward.
Thank you.
Again, for the record, I'm Charles Marsteller. I just wanted to say there's a caveat to the question of aggregate expenditure limits, and I realize that question is a little off topic. But I wanted to explain very quickly to the Commission that on July 11th, 2011, you considered the McCutcheon decision and voted 4-1 to repeal our law. That was blocked at the board by a coalition that was formed called Friends of Ethics. And that's our origin, and that explains why we are still here. I did want to say I left the room. That meeting was taped, and I have strong opinion on that matter because I'm aware of other events that occurred with other commissions in the United States, working with the Brennan Center to develop legislation to be both constitutional and respective of local law dealing with aggregate limits. So it's not as black and white, even though we were in fact sued. That would require a separate issue to be put on the agenda to be discussed so that we could get into the details. But I wanted to tell you at one point I was planning to raise again the question of aggregate limits because there are constitutional ways for addressing the concerns of McCutcheon. So I just wanted to give you the heads up on that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Anita Mayo, Pillsbury Winthrop Shop Hitman. As I've testified before, the proposed lobbyist-related changes are not needed. The current gift limit of $25 for lobbyists is so low that it cannot possibly have a corrupting influence on a city officer. Notwithstanding the foregoing, both versions of the proposed initiative prohibit lobbyists from making any gift, including a gift of travel, to city officers and their family members. This is a broad restriction, is not narrowly tailored, and applies regardless of whether the lobbyist has, is, or will ever lobby a city officer. The proposed ban could prohibit the mayor or any city officer from attending city-related meetings. For example, if the city and Bay Area corporations are interested in bringing the Olympics to the San Francisco Bay Area, and a for-profit corporation sponsored a luncheon or dinner meeting for the purpose of discussing the Olympics, city officers would not be able to eat during the luncheon or dinner meeting if the for-profit corporation qualified as an expenditure lobbyist. City officers would also be prohibited from receiving any gifts of travel related to the Olympics from such for-profit corporation. With regards to contributions by lobbyists, the proposed revised June initiative would prohibit a lobbyist from making a contribution to a city candidate exceeding $100 in an election cycle, since the current $500 limit applies on a per-election basis, which is clear and straightforward. Introducing a limit based on an election cycle basis will create unnecessary confusion. Both versions of the initiative contemplate imposing limits on contributions by lobbyists to candidate-controlled committees, including local ballot measure committees. Based on court precedents, imposing limits on contributions by lobbyists to a ballot measure committee would be unconstitutional. Regarding the ban on bundling, the proposed ban is not needed, as I've said before, since bundled contributions are subject to detailed disclosure requirements on the lobbying reports already. There's federal court precedents that a ban on bundling by lobbying violates the First Amendment, as I mentioned in May, and the Green Party of Connecticut versus Garfield. The second court not only invalidated a ban on lobbyist contributions, it also invalidated a provision which prohibited lobbyists from soliciting contributions on behalf of state candidates. In reaching this conclusion, the court stated that, quote, a limit on the solicitation of otherwise permissible contributions prohibits exactly the kind of expressive activity that lies at the First Amendment's core. That is because the solicitation of contributions involves speech. To solicit contributions on behalf of a candidate is to make a statement, quote, you should support this candidate, not only at the polls, but with the financial contribution, end quote. Speech uttered during a campaign for political office requires the fullest and most urgent application of the protections set forth in the First Amendment. For these reasons, I urge you not to impose a ban on bundling of contributions by lobbyists. Thank you.
How are you? Thank you so much. My name is Joshua Stroman. I'm here with the Artists Alliance for Democracy, but as well as with Represent Us. And I just want to thank the Commission and thank the staff for taking up this measure. And I really want to say, I've heard a lot of comments. I come here in support of Represent Us, and I definitely come here in support of good government, and I come here so that our, because we're in a time where our citizens, as was said earlier, do not have the fullest confidence in our elected officials, do not have the fullest confidence in our city governments or our local governments to be able to give us a government that, one, we voted for and that inspires us to believe in, to want to contribute to making San Francisco, making the Bay Area a place where everyone will come and want to live, work, raise their families. This is what this is about. This is about restoring integrity to this process. Now, I've heard many people come up here and talk about the various bans that are already in place, but obviously they're not working. So one of the things that I want to stress to this commission, I want to stress to the staff, is enforcement. Now, Commissioner Chu brought up a very good question. How do we know what type of contact has been had and all those sorts of things? Those are questions that you should know. We should understand how these laws have failed. You should know why all these people are in this room. You have failed. The ethics laws that are currently on the books have failed. That's why we want this measure. We're not asking for it out of the sky. It has failed. So we are taking it upon ourselves as citizens who care about San Francisco, who care about the Bay Area, who care about, our future, to say, look, whatever you had going on first, whatever laws or policies or protocols that were in place, they have not worked. I am strongly in support of this measure going forth in July. Give the voters a chance to vote on this. It's obvious that the folks who have been elected to solve this problem has failed. So it's time for the voters to have our say on this. I'm strongly in support of this measure going in the July ballot, and I thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have the time to speak and to make our concerns heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Greg Bryan. I'm with Represent Us, and I just want to just say one thing, add one thing. I think that there's a sense of urgency that this needs to, whatever the language is, it needs to be kind of worked out tonight so that at least this can get on the ballot, at least something can get on the ballot. So no matter what the little nuances or the things are with regards to language, that at least something can be agreed upon tonight so that things don't get pushed out to 2018. Thank you. And thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
I know it's relatively against protocol to come up again, but I did want to directly respond. I can't? Okay, at all? All right, sorry.
Andrew, you say he can't if he hadn't used his 3 minutes the first time?
If Mr. Kaplan is given an opportunity, and not to say that Mr. Kaplan wouldn't have good comments, he's certainly given us a lot of very good feedback. The commission would be obligated to provide everyone in the room with a second opportunity as well.
All right. All right, any other public comment? If not, there's a motion presently pending, and I take it that that grammatical error on page 12, line 11, where the word less should be deleted. I will call the question, which is to approve the option, the July option as presented by the staff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, the record should reflect that it has been passed unanimously by 4 commissioners as required, and that we should now move forward to see that it qualifies to be placed on the ballot in November. Mr. Keene?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge that the city of San Francisco and all of us owe a great debt to represent us. It's an organization, as was said by you, to have just been formed about a year ago. And the most refreshing thing to me is to see the vibrancy of a bunch of young people coming forward on good government measures. There are other organizations like Friends of Ethics and the Civil Grand Jury and the rest of us who've been involved with it over the years and have been talking about this. But for the most part, most of those folks have hair like mine, you know. And so to see all of you is really great. And I just want to thank you and encourage you to keep up the tremendous work and effort. I think you're an inspiring group.
Commissioner Haight.
Well, I'd like to second what Commissioner Keene has said. The atmosphere in this room today is completely 180 degrees from the atmosphere when I first came on this commission. And I don't think this commission or its staff can do the proper work unless there is full involvement on the part of the community. I am an average voter, and my concern is that it's great that we, have passed this and it's going to go on the ballot. But I hope that you will do the same kind of work to inform and educate the average voter. From what I understand, there are going to be at least 30 ballot measures. In situations like that, the average voter just says, I'm voting no on everything. So unless there's a real major concerted effort to educate voters, to get them to vote, particularly on this ballot, which is what is of concern to you, then I'm concerned that we may not succeed. And also, a lot of this is quite arcane. So you need to find a way to get the message out in a way that's really comprehensible to the average person out there, because otherwise they throw their hands up and say, okay, I don't understand what this is about, so I'm not going to vote for it. So that is your challenge now, and I think that's a much, much greater challenge than even getting it on the ballot. But I wish you luck. I'm sure you can do it, and and it's great that it's young people who are engaged, and we need that, because otherwise we're in deep trouble, which I think we are anyway, but that's another story. We don't need to address that. But thank you so much, and it's a huge difference having so many really well-informed and expert members of the public participating in the process. So thank you.
And I, on behalf of the Commission, also join in thanking all of you for working with the staff, and I want to thank the staff who spent hours getting this into the form it is. But let me, for those of you who may be new to the process, once this goes on the ballot, the first thing is there's a Ballot Simplification Committee that meets to word the way in which the description of this is put in the voter's handbook. And that's very important because that's really what people look at in the voter's handbook, so that when that meeting takes place, I urge you to be in attendance to help draft the language. There are 5 members, and believe me, they are very dedicated, but they're like your high school English teacher, and they parse every word, and they will spend a long time whether or not they can use this word or that word. And either Vice Chairman Keene or I and Ms. Pelham will be there, but to have some support behind making sure that we get that. But even more importantly, San Francisco has hundreds of political clubs. And the month of August, the last part of August, and the month of September and October are when those clubs meet to either endorse or take a position against or for ballot measures. And it's very important that proponents and supporters of this ballot measure turn out at those meetings to show the community the support, because under the laws of San Francisco, if I go to those meetings or Commissioner Keene goes to the meetings, we can't urge the voters to vote for it. We are constrained from taking a position. All we can do is tell them information, what it's about. But we can't, at the end of it, say, and we want you to vote for it. Now, that may be ridiculous, but that is the rule, so that what's needed are voters, people who can say, after we may make a presentation at one of these community meetings, and we advise them of the restrictions that we're under, but I mean, it should be obvious that we put it on the ballot, and we can point that out, but we can't urge them to vote one way or another, but you can. And the more people who show up at these community meetings in support, the more likely it is that these organizations will support it. And when the ballot, when the handbook comes out, it'll show what organizations support it, and it's very important. The more organizations we can have behind it and the less opposition. And I think in this case, where we've had as much public input, the kind of opposition that there was to Proposition C, even that, it passed by 75 or 78%. I'd like to see this passed by 90% and show that truly the public is behind this initiative. So with that, I will, yes.
Before we move on from this item, as you may recall, Chair Reddy, the last time that when we did Proposition C last year, the Commission actually had a formal vote on who would be the spokesperson or representative for the various political club meetings you mentioned, as well as media inquiries and such about the proposed measure. I don't know if the Commission wants to do it now, since, as you mentioned, a lot of these endorsement meetings are coming up pretty fast and furious. And the Ballot Simplification Committee meeting you mentioned is actually scheduled to discuss this measure this Friday. So a lot of these public arenas in which the Commission or whoever the Commission decides to choose as representative will be asked to speak are coming up pretty quickly. So I don't know if the Commission wants to designate that spokesperson tonight.
Any commissioners, any comments?
I think remembering back on C, the reality of what happened was that Commissioner Rennie wound up taking on an enormous amount of effort in regard to going to all of those meetings. He went to so many of them, and because what we did is we formally authorized Commissioner Rennie to be our spokesperson for these presentations. Vice Chair Andrews also went to a few, and there were two, I think, that neither the Chair Rennie or Vice Chair Andrews could go to, so I went to. My suggestion would be that at the direction of the chair, we all be empowered to go and explain this to any group that the chair might want it to be explained to, either for the chair to go or if he can't make it, for one of us to go, whoever he designates, mainly because he wound up just breaking his back the last time going to all of them and sort of taking the pressure off him. So I'd be happy to go to as many.
I appreciate that. I would that suggestion, and I will call for a vote on it, but I would add the executive director as also being authorized to appear.
Right.
I don't want to add to her burden, but I think it is important.
Yes, I agree.
And certainly, I just want to remind the Commission that we can have those kinds of scheduling discussions without running afoul of the Brown Act, but certainly to be careful in terms of communicating amongst yourselves about the substance of any presentations and so on and so forth. Obviously, we want to remain very strictly observe the Brown Act and all its public meeting restrictions.
Right.
Do I hear a motion that along the line of what Commissioner Kane said? Well, just, in fact, I think under the bylaws, I'm authorized as a spokesman, and the sense of the commission is that if I can't go, or if I want to assign it to somebody else, I can assign it to any of the other three commissioners. Okay? And I appreciate that, because I will tell you, there are times when there are 3 or 4 meetings a day, or at night. They're usually at night, but they're interesting, and you see local politics at its best. All right, let's turn to discussion and.
I think we need a vote on the message.
All right.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Public comment. Hopefully none. All right. Hearing none. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Turning to item 5, discussion and possible action on ordinance introduced by Supervisor Peskin to amend the Campaign and Governmental Code to require members of city boards and commission to file behested payment reports. And I think Mr. Hepner is here from Supervisor Peskin's office can bring us up to date and tell us what you are looking for from us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lee Hepner from Supervisor Peskin's office. Thank you, Commissioners, Chair Rennie, Director Pelham, Deputy City Attorney Shen. Thank you for your help. I do have copies of some amended pieces of legislation that I'm happy to distribute to you. I left 10 or so copies on the table for the public, but I am hoping that somebody can distribute those. And actually, could I grab just one of those? Thanks. We can walk through some of the changes that we've made, some of which were discussed pretty expressly in the department staff report. But jumping in, I do want to thank you for taking this matter up again, and for staff's report, and for soliciting comment from the FPPC, all of which is going to be invaluable as we move forward with this. There are a lot of stakeholders with this legislation, and it's become very evident that we need to strike exactly the right balance to make sure that this is furthering the aims of transparency and openness while not imposing too big a burden on commissioners or board members themselves or on ethics department staff. So I do want to walk through just a couple of the changes that we have made just in the past week. I'm sorry this did not make it into your packets. We set forth on the first page a definition for auctioneer and explicitly exempted auctioneering later a little further down as an activity that does not count as a solicitation, just because there was some concerns about that. On the second page, beginning at line 8, we defined interested party as any person who files an application for or is the subject of any administrative action taken by a board or commission. We defined nonprofit organization generally as 501c organizations. Under section 3.610 subsection A, we did, as we indicated last month, we expanded the filing time from 30 days to quarterly or 90 days. 90 days from the date at which the $5,000 contribution was made, or a series of, and then in the next subsection 2, we left it at 30 days for those solicitations that are made to or to solicited or to interested parties. On the third page, we have that exception under subsection D for auctioneers. We also undertook a definition and tried to carve out full-time employees of nonprofit organizations who have fundraising responsibilities and are soliciting charitable contributions on behalf of their nonprofit employer. So if you're working in the capacity as a fundraiser for a nonprofit, that's your job, then you will be exempt from reporting every solicitation that you make, with the exception that, we do want you to disclose any solicitations made to or of interested parties. And lastly, at Ethics Department staff request, we allowed for this not to be just reported on a Form 803, but on some electronic form or other means as staff sees fit. There's some flexibility there, the reporting mechanism, and per staff's report, which I'm happy to get into a little bit. I understand that might take some resources and some time, and we're more than willing to take that into consideration. With respect to the staff report, just a couple of comments. I thought the reference to the Filchev advice, which is the FPPC's report, I thought was particularly instructive on one point, and this is a point that has raised concerns from several of our board members and commissioners, and that is, well, what if my name is on, goes out in a mass mailer, I raise money for the San Francisco Ballet or some other organization, and I'm selling $10,000 tickets to a charity night, and my name is on the mailer that goes out. Is that a solicitation? And the instruction from the FPPC is that, in fact, if you're a board member of the ballet, for instance, and every board member's name is included, there's no particular distinction to your name from the other board members, and that actually that would not count as a solicitation. On the other hand, if there is some distinction made, with whether your name is highlighted separate from other board members, or it looks like there's a fact-specific determination that is made, I suppose, if the board member or commissioner personally signed it or crossed off the Mr. So-and-so and wrote out, Aaron instead of Supervisor Peskin, maybe details like that might make it appear a more direct solicitation, more like something that should be reported. And those are the circumstances that would give rise to this reporting obligation. But anyway, I thought that was very interesting advice from the FPPC and kind of confirmed what I think that both common sense and kind of what we had talked about. Now, there was another concern about Twitter solicitations. I just briefly thought I'd throw that out there. What happens if somebody says, hey, donate to Greenpeace on Twitter? I think that there are certain aspects of this where there is going to be an effect on a board member or commissioner's behavior, that they, as part of their responsibility in a public-facing role, are going to have to change their behavior in some ways very minorly, and maybe that means, hey, don't tweet out, donate to Greenpeace. Maybe that's something that that person should not be doing in their public-facing role. Whether or not Greenpeace has an item before the board or commission, it starts to be a little bit sticky. I don't want to say suspect, but at least maybe behavior that a commissioner or board member should not be engaging in. There was a mention.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
About that?
Yes.
So what is engaging in that behavior, tweeting out about Greenpeace, what is the nexus between Greenpeace and the commissioner's role in deciding matters that come before it? What's the conflict or problem?
I suppose that the nexus would have to be there would be a secondary nexus in that circumstance. Maybe Greenpeace is supporting the creation of a new park downtown, and there would probably have to be some secondary nexus for it to make very clear sense. But
currently drafted, if the commissioner were to tweet and were to generate contributions of $5,000, they would have to file a report. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Even though the Greenpeace activity may or may not have anything to do with the work of the commission on which that commissioner serves.
That's right. And this is a good time to mention the portion of the staff report that I thought was very well written, talking about how wide to cast this net, or how narrowly to craft this reporting requirement. And we could craft it even wider, was one option that ethics staff set forth. And say any political donating activity or solicitation to any candidate for elected office, that could be included, theoretically.
But wouldn't you want to narrow it down to those matters that the commissioner would be deciding upon? So if it's an out of state alma mater, mm-hmm. and the alma mater has no business in front of the commission, why would we need to know about that?
Right, and I think that more often than not, this reporting requirement may capture behavior that is entirely innocuous. There's no suspect. Why do we need to capture it then? My response to that is this. By limiting the scope of the reporting requirement, what we're doing is essentially putting the onus on the commissioner or board member themselves to be the judge of whether this is something that should or should not be reported. And from a policy angle, and I think that there's fair room for disagreement here, I don't think that putting the onus on the commissioner or the board member in a self-reporting context to make that tough determination is where we want to put that balance. So, yes, a lot of this behavior might be innocuous, but coming from furthering the aims of transparency and openness, I think it's probably the public's obligation to make that determination of whether that solicitation is suspect in any way. So I think that that's kind of where that ideological or principled view comes from, is that I don't think it should be the commissioner or board member's role to make that judgment. And I'm more than willing to hear pushback on that, of course, but that's kind of where our office is coming from.
Yeah, I would hope that we would have more trust in some of our commission members to be able to make that determination. And I'd also have a follow-up question with regard to the privacy of those donors, particularly out-of-state donors, or those, the example I gave last month, of parents at a school, for example. When they make the contribution to the charitable organization, I think they have a reasonable expectation that their name won't show up in a public database.
So this requirement does exist for elected officials in various contexts. I don't think it's that rare or unique to require the reporting of people who make contributions over $5,000. I think that threshold is set relatively high, so that you're really capturing.
But are those other examples? Do they require all donations, or those only for contributions made with some sort of connection, a nexus back to the government organization?
Right. I mean, maybe staff or City Attorney Shen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's cast a similarly wide net for elected officials who are subject to behested payment requirements.
Yeah, just to respond to that issue, currently elected officials are required to file these behested payment reports with respect to any contribution of $5,000 or more. Doesn't really matter what the source of the contribution is and whether that source of the contribution has any connection to the business before that elected. It's a pretty wide net, as Lee pointed out.
And I think that we're getting into the territory where striking the balance is particularly important. We have no desire to invade the privacy of any individuals. That said, if you're a board member or a commissioner in a public-facing role, and I do want to reiterate, this is not about trust any more than it inherently is about sort of trust in our political system. But if you are in that public-facing role, you are in a unique position to leverage your public-facing role and the determinations that you make at committees and board hearings to potentially raise substantial amounts of money. We don't know the extent to which this is going on. Anecdotally, I know it's out there. Our office, knows that this is something that does occur, and in the interest of public disclosure, which Ethics Department staff also recognizes the high demand right now for more publicly accessible information, electronically or otherwise. I think that that's where this legislation is coming from. I can wrap up my comments fairly soon. I did have a comment. There was a note in the staff report noting that this is going to be this requires filing these reports with the ethics department as opposed to with the individual commissions. The only reason we put that in there is because I think it would be pretty difficult to ask our boards and commissions to develop their own mechanisms for receiving and processing this, and I think that having it centralized is probably best for the sake of uniformity. But to that end, and along with the recommendation of Ethics Department staff, we are happy to support additional funding for the Ethics Department. We are always happy to do so in order to further the aims of this, and are certainly amenable to a start date or an effective date of January 1st, 2018, to allow Ethics Department staff to some time to get these mechanisms up and running. We're more than amenable to that. Just one additional point. There was mention made in the discussion on the ballot measure, item number 4, with respect to whether we were considering prohibitions in this. We weren't really until a couple of days ago, or rather until we read the letter from Friends of Ethics. I think that our office would be amenable to a prohibition, a flat-out prohibition on solicitations of interested parties, or solicitations to maybe specific types of 501c3s, 501c4s, I think was one that came up in particular. That said, it's not in the legislation right now. I'll leave it at that and take the recommendation. The question that I had is, does that obviate a disclosure requirement? If you're prohibiting activity outright, does it obviate the need to disclose your other behavior? Again, my thought process ended up with, well, probably not. When you're committing something to paper and you're required to do so in the form of a filed statement with a government entity, that is kind of, causing, it's creating another honesty mechanism, another little self-check. This is all self-reporting, again, and I think that, a lot of this, while we trust our board members and commissioners, we want to make sure that we create the most fluid mechanism for that reporting.
Let me ask you a question, and that is, if there's, say, an invitation to the opera gala, and it goes out and it lists names of the gala committee, and it asks for, you 10,000, 5,000, 1,000, whatever the table is, and my name is on it as one of the committee, is that a solicitation?
No, and I think the FPPC letter addresses that point directly, and at risk of misquoting it, my understanding is no, that if there's no distinction between your name and the other names, if you're just part of a list of the committee members, then it would not be a solicitation requiring reporting.
And particularly if it doesn't identify any city office, that doesn't identify me as a commissioner.
I think that's that would be another distinction. And procedurally, happy to hear the discussion tonight. If you have any questions, I'll hang around. I don't think it's necessary for you to take action, but while it is before us, I would be grateful for any recommendations that this body has. Thank you.
Commissioners, if I just had a quick couple of comments. One of the questions that the memo tried to outline for discussion tonight is the question of breadth and nexus. And Mr. Heppner talked about the potential burden on officials for having to distinguish between those solicitations that might have some nexus to their official duties versus just a broader list. And I guess one of the things I wanted to suggest is that every year, as you all know, with the Form 700, the Statement of Economic Interest, commissioners are routinely required to consider what the reach of their work might be, because their conflict of interest code disclosure categories identifies the kinds of interests, or should identify the kinds of interests that they could potentially influence. And it doesn't include the breadth, for example, that an elected official would have typically, because commission and board roles are typically more prescribed to certain functions. So I think it's maybe not as difficult as possible as on first blush it might seem for commissioners to consider the ways in which their particular mandate could translate to the kinds of solicitations that they should be disclosing. I just wanted to throw that out there as an alternative thought to whether that burden is too great, or whether it might be something that commissioners are quite familiar with already.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have any comments, questions? All right, I'll call for public comment.
Good evening, Commissioners. Back again, Charlie Marsteller. I just wanted to say that it's fascinating to see how this issue is growing. And I think our elected officials have been really put in a difficult position because they're out fundraising in some cases for private sector activity, which is perhaps in their districts, that would support their local home-based, homegrown grassroots organizations, which is a very good thing. On the other hand, the first people they were going to think of to call would be the lobbyists or the people that are making comments to them that are trying to get them to influence administrative and legislative action. That said, I have always been one to personally, and I think many people in FOE have felt that disclosure is where we start. So building a basis or database of disclosure to see and track this type of activity, much of which now is reported anecdotally or in the press, is probably a good start so that we can start building our database and following this activity, which is very robust. In our communications to you, we have given you a list of contributions that have come in or have been issued by the behest, say for Google, in the millions of dollars, like $6.8 million. And I believe that was for one item. So this is not small bucks. Routinely, some supervisors are going out and going through a list of organizations, or rather lobbyists or people looking to influence administrative and legislative action, because they are in effect registered lobbyists, to make donations. So they're bringing in the bacon where there's 5 or 10 contributions that have been made in $5,000 increments that goes to the 501c3 or the Ilya Mosinarian Philanthropic Institution in their district. So my point is that clearly this is maybe not the way they want to go when they see it in print and when they have to disclose it to the Ethics Commission. And then we have a much better sense of what's going on. So I would urge you to support this, and I would also ask whether or not it would not be a good idea for you to seek an amendment to the current law to prohibit such activity from lobbyists.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Planthold. I wanted to echo what Mr. Hepner said, that you don't necessarily need to take a position. You could just offer comments or raise questions. You like this, you don't like that, you wonder why. So do you need to make a decision? No. Should you? A lot of us would like you to make some sort of supportive decision separate from, in addition to comments. I want to call attention to the supplemental memo for item 5 that came from Larry Bush and Friends of Ethics, questioning part of the staff analysis and recommendation. So then, in looking at the revised text that Mr. Hepner has brought forward, maybe it's being addressed, even if he hasn't specifically linked it to our comments or to the staff. I want to note on page 3 what's D, exceptions, the number 1 issue. I think it helpful that there's that second part that says commissioners, provided the commissioners will have an obligation to file behested payment reports, so on and so on. So I'll give you archival history. In the past century, I was an officer on the board of a nonprofit. The executive director was also on a major commission. There are several commissions in this city that have perks that can give away, provide services or things of value, of significant value to people. And so that person would solicit contributions to a major fundraising event, which was handled by somebody else. Then that money was brought into the nonprofit. At the same time, that commission, like I said, did have different business that people could benefit from when they went for a decision before it. So the idea of requiring a filing of behested payments reports, even if the donation is not specific to the commission and the duties of the commission, but is part of the fundraising activities of that staffer, I think it's helpful to keep in mind, and I think this is an acceptable start towards addressing that option. I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to name names. This is, like I say, in the past century. So everything is just dusty records. But as a person who was an officer on the board of directors, I was uneasy with how some of this was happening. Now there's a chance to at least bring light to it. Thank you.
Good evening again. My name is Jonathan Mincer, and I'm a political attorney here in the city. I didn't plan on speaking on this issue until I heard something that could particularly concern me from the presentation. The phrase that we don't know the extent to which commissioners are soliciting donations to nonprofit organizations and the degree to which that interested parties may be appearing before them. That's particularly concerning. I truly believe that this is a solution in the search of a problem. I also am scared that this is really just going to be a trap for the unwary. It's worth noting that elected officials are already subject to this disclosure requirement. It's worth noting that, most major contracts or most things where there's really a concern of this go before those elected officials. I'm afraid that this is a trap for the unwary. I'm afraid that this can be used as a tool to levy fines, administrative action against small commissioners who don't even know this law exists, who don't know that by raising money for their PTA, they're implicated in any way. There's already enough disincentives not to go into public service. Why add another layer when we don't even know that there's a problem? Is there really such an evil? Well, we don't know, but is there really such an evil of somebody soliciting millions of dollars contributions to donations of an art commissioner, to a nonprofit supported by an art commissioner, or some other small commission? Is this something we really need? And again, I don't even want to start to brainstorm and try to understand the legal issues that may come by a prohibition on behested payments. Putting all the possible legal issues aside, I encourage you not to look at that, because at the end of the day, for every evil scenario that you can concoct in your head, think about what's really happening. We're talking about donations to nonprofit organizations, to 501c3 organizations that do great work in the community. And, to the extent that we know that government resources are limited, nonprofits and a lot of, affordable housing nonprofits step in a time of need. I really don't think that we should take actions to limit contributions to nonprofits, nor do I believe there's really a purpose for this, nor do I believe we need another disincentive to public service. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Debbie Lerman from the Human Services Network. I did speak to this somewhat in July about the need to encourage nonprofits to serve on commissions and share their expertise for the good of the community, and to balance that with the ability to raise funds for their organizations. We do not, as the previous speaker said, we do not want to hamstring the ability of nonprofits to raise money. And the city is on our case all the time to raise money and to enhance whatever funding we receive from the city. So that leaves us with this need for a balanced approach. I do appreciate the staff memo suggesting that the legislation apply only where there's a nexus. But we have worked with Supervisor Peskin's office, and we appreciate the inclusion of this exemption for nonprofit staff who are fundraisers and who are simply doing their jobs, and the need to balance that with legitimate reasons for donors to want confidentiality. We also would have preferred that exemption also apply to boards of directors, and I suspect some of you do serve on boards. Some of the most civically engaged people in this city both serve on commissions and serve on boards. And we need our boards of directors to be leading the way in our fundraising campaigns. It is a relief to hear that you can still be listed on an invitation, but it would be nice if you could also scribble a note to your buddy saying, hey, Tom, how about coming to this event? So I think we would like to see that be a little broader, but we are appreciative of this exception, and we'll work with Supervisor Peskin for whatever final measure goes to the Board of Supervisors. And we do agree with the interested party exception. That was the compromise that made a lot of sense as a way to resolve any potential, again, undue influence. And the other thing I want to say is there were some comments here about a ban, and whether it's a lobbyist or anybody else, I think we would have a real problem if there was any kind of proposal to ban contributions by anybody to 501c3 organizations. And so I hope that does not gain traction as a serious discussion. Thank you.
I don't think you have to worry about that. I don't think it'd be constitutional.
Even by a lobbyist or whatever, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Bob Dockendorf, former Ethics Commissioner and with Friends of Ethics. I just wanted to talk about 501c4s and 501c3s. 501c4s are really the issue, I think, that we're looking at with behest payments that run, as pointed out earlier, into the tens of millions of dollars in some cases. When you have a 501c4 that requests a contribution from an elected official or a commissioner for a pet project, that needs to be recognized and needs to be brought to public. You can't hide these kind of things from the public. I think we need legislation that brings this out into the open. Thank you.
Thank you. Any commissioner have any comments or want us to take any action this evening?
Well, I don't think we've been asked to take action by Supervisor Peskin's office. We've been asked by his staff member and also by several of the people who are in favor of the measure to indicate by comments and other things as to whether or not we believe that the measure is on the right track, whether we would endorse it. If it's not something that's going to be part of the Ethics Commission's bylaws or any part of us doing anything. So I can say that just personally, as one commissioner, I think Supervisor Peskin's on the right track in regard to where he's heading. There are some concerns that are pointed out both by our staff and by other people in the interested parties, aspects of things that compromise can be reached on in order to achieve the transparency that's necessary so that someone doesn't leverage their position as a commissioner or as a San Francisco official in any kind of improper way. I think there's a necessity for that. I think it's going, and in my opinion, Supervisor Peskin is on the right track and it's going in the right direction.
I would only add to that I agree this is on the right track. I would like to see it a little more narrowly tailored so that we can actually get at the nexus of the behested payments and the conflict that arises when the matter is coming before the commission. I think that to cast such a broad net is almost like trying to boil the ocean, and you will spend a lot of time, sorting the wheat from the chaff. And if you can be more targeted, I think you can be more effective.
Yes, Commissioner.
With regards to the last person who commented, why not limit this legislation to 501c4s as opposed to including 501c3s?
I'm happy to venture a guess at an answer there. I think that would be narrowing it too far. And in fact, we're not only interested in the entity to which money is being solicited for, but also the individuals or entities from which charitable contributions are being solicited of. So it could be a 501c, 3, 9, 12, 400, I don't care if you're soliciting it from somebody who has a matter coming before your board or commission. So that's the other element of this that I think is at play there.
Well, the staff in your memo made a list of recommendations. I think it's on page 7. And I would make a motion that we adopt those recommendations and have them transmitted as on behalf of the commission.
Second that.
Any discussion? Any public comment? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Record should reflect that it was passed unanimously and that the staff recommendations will be transmitted to Supervisor Peskin with, I think, a clear indication that we support the intention of the legislation, but those concerns that the staff has identified should be understood.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. I appreciate it.
All right. Item number 6 is continued to our next meeting. Item number 7 is a discussion of the Executive Director's report.
Excuse me, Chair Rennie. Even though we're continuing item 6, we do need to take public comment on it.
Pardon me?
Even though we are continuing item 6 to the next meeting, we do need to take public comment on that item.
I thought the item was moved, but I'll call for public comment on item number 6. Hearing none, we'll move to item number 7. Ms. Pelham?
Thank you. And I just would say for the record, our apologies to the Commission and the public on item number 6. We had a snafu in the date of the public posting for that item. So we did not, we thought it would be prudent to make sure that the public had full opportunity to be here. So we've posted the notice and we will continue to do that as necessary. So again, our apologies. In terms of our agenda, item 7 and this month's Executive Director's Report, I think the most important thing I'd like to share with you this evening is that I'm very pleased to announce the hiring of our new Deputy Director, Jessica Bloom, who is here with us this evening.
Great. Welcome.
She's going to be joining our office on August the 15th. She's assuming day-to-day management of our investigative and enforcement program, and will head our enforcement and legal affairs function. I'm very delighted that she's going to be joining us with her legal skill, her enforcement experience, and her insights, and her mentoring talents as well to our growing staff over the coming year. As you recall, perhaps from my update last month, the Commission received over 120 applications for this position. So it was a very competitive process, and these were applicants from around the country. Ms. Bloom comes with a strong record of accomplishment and comes highly regarded as a very keen legal mind, a fresh thinker, and a collaborative problem solver. Also a quick study with experience approaching complex issues from new angles. I think that's going to be a real asset for us as the work only unfolds that all that we have to do in the coming years. Her background is she spent 6 years as an Assistant Attorney General working for the Missouri Attorney General's office, where she worked to ensure enforcement of state environmental and animal welfare laws, including the cleanup of the state's waters, landfills, and hazardous waste. And through the creation of a new unit that dealt with animal cruelty prevention, where she led it, she initiated it, and she managed and responded to complaints, investigated violations, and successfully prosecuted a number of cases to uphold state laws. She also received recognition as an Outstanding Achievement Award in that office in 2010 and through 2012. Most recently, for the past 3 years, she has been serving as a senior staff attorney for the nonprofit Animal Legal Defense Fund here in the Bay Area region, but it also works across the country. In this role, she's applied her legal skill to win several of that organization's major cases. She's worked with conservation groups successfully also to resolve cases protecting wild and endangered animals. Her law degree is from the University of Iowa College of Law, where she was editor-in-chief of the Journal of Gender, Race, and Justice. And she holds a BA from the University of Iowa, where she majored in organizational communications and ethics. It's a very exciting time for us. There's a lot of work going on, and I think Ms. Bloom's experience and insights and her skills are going to be a real welcomed asset. So I just will look forward to providing more information for you in the coming months about the structure of the office and how we're going to align ourselves to get all of our work done. But I was delighted she could be here tonight to have a chance to introduce her to you all and to those in attendance. And I hope you join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Well, welcome. And, would you like to say a word or two? We'd be happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Leanne. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm very, very excited about the work. I know it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, as you heard from my background, but I've already started diving in and found this riveting, this debate that's been going on and learning all the key players. And I also wanted to mention that I brought my husband and my daughter earlier. So if you heard a crying child as she was escorted from the room, that was May. She's 2 years old, and we've just rented a house in Berkeley. So we're excited to be a part of the community and to be part of the commission, or staff of the commission. So thank you very much.
Well, welcome, and we look forward to working with you. And you have a big job, because I think we have, 2 openings for enforcement? 3, with one enforcement officer left, and then we'll go 2. So hopefully we'll give you the resources so you can really turn to. And some of the criticism that if you attend our meetings, you will hear from time to time is that we have been a sleeping tiger or something that they called us, that we didn't do enough enforcement, but a lot of that had to do with personnel. So,
well, I'm your gal.
Okay, great.
Well, you have a delightful 2-year-old also.
Yes.
It seemed like she was commenting justifiably on the merits right at the time when she let us know that she was here, but bring her whenever you want.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And I guess I would make, since it's the evening for corrections, one other note on the memo and item attachment 2. I provided again the charts showing the number of open formal complaints in our caseload as of July 20th, as well as the matters under preliminary review. Those numbers are accurate. We have 22 formal complaints still pending, 56 matters under preliminary review. The memo, however, says 55. So my apologies for that. I did the data after the memo, and I did not correct the memo. So, but we want to keep providing this information for you so we can keep track of where we are, and with additional staff resources coming on board, more hands to help get those numbers moving along. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to make sure to introduce our newest staff member to you.
Any questions or comments? Other than to compliment Ms. Pelham and the staff for continuing to provide us with great support. Good. Now, any public comment on the Executive Director's report? Hearing none. Item 8, discussion and possible action on items for future meetings. It has been the practice in the past for the Commission to skip one meeting during the summer because of the vacation schedules, and it would be my recommendation, subject to comment, that we cancel the August meeting. I know one of the commissioners is going to be unavailable in any case, and that we defer all matters that, I think there are only one or two matters that we were contemplating in the August meeting, that they be continued to the September meeting. Any comments or concerns? Any public comment?
Just a reminder, you're not off the hook, because of course you've got 30 club meetings or whatever to go to. So you'll be very busy with that. It's just as well you're not worrying yourselves with agenda.
Thank you. And I do feel that, considering the amount of work that the staff we put on the staff over the last few months, hopefully some of them can take vacation. All right, so that will be, the notice will go out that the meeting for August has been canceled, and we will, our next meeting will be the fourth Monday in September. Any other comment or public comment? Then item 9, additional opportunity for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Public comment? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Record should reflect that unanimously we adjourned at 7:45, which is pretty early. Thank you very much.